Perhaps you know of the iconic American scholar, mythologist, writer, Joseph Campbell, who uttered these words, "Follow your bliss." Just three little words, follow your bliss. And I think that by now, any of us who have gravitated to a teaching such as this has heard that, has explored that for themselves to try to personalize that. But what do those three words actually mean? Follow your bliss. I think one has to get really clear and perhaps go on a path of self-inquiry to understand what bliss is by means of you. What is bliss? What do you know of bliss? What have you defined that or discovered that for yourself? And when we began to research that, I came up with the idea that bliss in and of itself is where all of the factors come in this beautiful congruent energy and bring about an experience of fulfillment. Fulfillment. When was the last time that you felt this immense, deep, personal satisfaction or fulfillment? What were you doing? What was the activity? Who were you with? Where were you at? What were all of the elements that combined to bring that? And that pretty much puts us in alignment with the idea of what our bliss is. And so when you understand that and have begun to find that for yourself, then what does it mean to follow that? To follow that, to do whatever it is that you need, whatever it is that it takes in order to be faithful to or to be in relationship with what bliss is. You ever had the imagery of walking through the desert and you see what's called an oasis, and how the thirsty traveler throws themselves at the banks of this oasis and drinks very heavily. And I think that bliss is very much like that. It's the oasis for our soul. And when we allow our soul to be matched to that oasis, to that thing of bliss, it's as if the soul drinks very hungrily for that, because it knows that that is what it needs in order to get your attention and to create a relationship with you. And what do I mean by that? Well, there is the human part of us, this experience that we have on a day-to-day basis on this global sphere called Earth. But then there is the soul of you. And we teach often that the soul of you is the true you. And so what does it mean to follow the bliss, not necessarily from the human perspective of you, but the soul of you? You have to say, why am I here? What is it about this particular journey that is calling me to discover this bliss? And so Joseph Campbell wrote a book somewhere around 1949, I believe, and he called it The Hero with a Thousand Faces. And in this book, what he was intimating and what he had discovered in his research is that the same story has been told throughout all of time. The same story, meaning the story of the hero who goes about on a journey of self-discovery. And that story, the archetype of that, the elements of that, not only are true within all of famous literature, every movie that you and I have ever seen, but it's also your story and my story as well. And when we come to realize this story, then we can embark upon this journey at a different level of consciousness rather than a consciousness of fear. In looking throughout all of recorded history, and Joseph Campbell uses this term, he says this monomyth, or this like myth of all people, this basic story structure, is exhibited through the life of Christ, the life of Buddha, Moses, Muhammad, Godzilla. It doesn't matter who it is. There is a hero's journey involved with that. So he wrote this. He said, a hero then ventures forth from the world of common day into a region of supernatural wonder. Fabulous forces are there encountered, and a decisive victory is won. The hero comes back from this mysterious adventure with the power to bestow beneficial knowledge on his fellow man. And so you can just take the Bible, for example. Every single story in there is an example of the hero's story. You've got the prodigal son. You've got David and Goliath. You've got Joseph being sold into slavery by his brothers. You've got Jesus himself. You've got modern-day luminaries like Nelson Mandela or Gandhi. Every movie and every literature hero that you have ever watched or read about is an example of the template of the hero's journey. Did you know that George Lucas, when he finally completed the Star Wars trilogies, thanked Joseph Campbell because it was Joseph Campbell's hero's journey that actually provided the story structure for Star Wars? Another little tidbit about George Lucas is that the Science of Mind book was on his bookshelf. And when someone asked him, "What is that?" he said, "Oh, where do you think the Force came from?" "May the Force be with you" was talking about divine consciousness. You start to see then that this particular theme, this story structure, is in all things. It's Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz. It's Rocky. It's Forrest Gump. It is you. It is me. The hero's journey is within all of us. And so as I look at this particular story and I think about the soul, what I've come to realize about the soul is its beautiful, incessant urgency to get our attention. Our attention meaning the human part of us. It's a constant invitation. It's a beckoning, if you will, a whispering. It's an urging. Again, Ernest Holmes always talked about it as the inner propulsion, the inner energy that tugs at us. What do you think that is? That is the soul of you, asking more of the human part of you to reawaken and to go upon these particular journeys in order to understand and discover that you and I are far greater than we will ever give ourselves credit for. Even those of us who are masters at the hero's journey, we still have yet to scratch the surface of what it is that our soul is possible of. So how do you grasp something like that? How do you personalize something like that? The template is the same. There is a departure. The hero leaves the familiar world behind. There is an initiation. The hero goes through all of the trials and turmoils and adventures, navigating himself through this, and then there is a return. So rather than just talk about this for you, you have a handout under your chair. It is this time where if you're wearing a wig, it may fall off when you bend over. Please adjust your extensions right now. There you go. But this is a template of the hero's journey. And if you were to Google Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey, you would see this and a multitude of other diagrams that are similarly talking about the same thing. In fact, in Joseph Campbell's version, there are 17 parts of this particular journey. But for this condensed version, if you look at the top, it says the known. The known world is what? Our everyday world. The things that we take for granted, almost as if it's the sort of hamster wheel energy of what it is that we do blindly, sometimes or mostly unconscious. And there is a part of that particular lifestyle that reaches the brink where the soul does what? It says, come. It says there's more to your life, there's more to you, there is more to your soul's calling than what you are engaged in this moment. Come. And it is that beckoning, it is that invitation that brings you to that line, the line between the known and the unknown. And if you look at what that is, he calls it the threshold. And just like there is a threshold going into your place of living, there is a threshold in the world between what is known and what is unknown. And you are asked to cross that. You are asked to cross that. What I love and laugh about it is there is a threshold guardian. Do you know who the threshold guardian is? That is all the voices that say, don't do it. Don't do it. Don't go into the mystery. Stay here where it's safe and boring and you know exactly what's going to happen. And yet you realize that's not what you're here for. That is not what your soul's calling is. You and I are not built for that. And so regardless of the guardians of the threshold, we have the sense enough to be able to move and take a step beyond that into the land of the unknown. Often I have illustrated that and I've called it the fence of familiarity. And on one side of the fence is none of you are here because that side of the fence is complete and total unconsciousness, where we are completely unaware. And so there has been something within our lives that has provided enough discontent to where we have crossed over to the fence. The beautiful part about crossing over the fence is that then you are left with this infinite landscape of territory, of life to explore. And the irony of that is that most of us are hanging right at the edge of the fence. So look at the threshold. Imagine if you've made the decision, if you've honored the discontent and you're willing to march into the unknown, but you just hang out at the threshold. Look how much of the rest of the journey has yet to be experienced. When you cross over the fence of familiarity into the unknown and you hang out and you just cling here because everybody else is doing it. And everybody said, yeah, it's safe here. Don't go any further. I hear you'll get eaten if you go that way. And then what happens is we miss out on what else is there. And so what we are called to do is to continue to march into the unknown. There, according to Joseph Campbell, is where we find helpers, we find mentors. We also find a temptation that says, are you crazy? It's not too late to turn back. Why don't you just go back? And so you see, that is like the valley of challenges. He calls it the challenge. And this is where you and I are really tested. To me, this is the most valuable part because this is where you and I come face to face with whether we listen to the human part of us or whether we listen to the soul part of us. And when we choose to listen to the soul part of us, we realize that regardless of the challenge, regardless of the voices of conformity that call us all kinds of names, that say that you are irresponsible, that say that you are impetuous, that say, don't you remember what happened the last time that you tried to do this? The voice that says, I didn't raise you this way. I had a friend who was from the Deep South, and her parents always told her, now don't you go getting beyond your raisin. It's that voice that says, now don't you go getting beyond your raisin. In other words, how dare you think that you can rise above the generations of what has come before you? And yet, guess what? That's exactly what you are called to do. Can you imagine if no one did that, where we would be as a civilization? And so you start to begin to understand the importance of this journey and the fact that you and I must go upon this journey. And so as we pass through the temptation and the challenges, we get to that beautiful place that we call bottoming out or rock bottom. If you look, it's that beautiful thing called death. And isn't it great? Because death really symbolizes the death of the old idea. And the thing about the death of the old idea is there must be a complete death. Not a Monty Python death where you go and, I'm not dead yet. And I keep coming, I'm not dead yet. It's the complete death, right? It's not the, oh, okay, I've changed. Ooh, no, I'm going to go and pick it back up again. Oh, no, I'm going to let it go. Oh, no, I'm going to pick it back up again. It's the complete removal or departure from the old way of thinking, the old paradigm. Because as spiritual law teaches us, in order for something to be born, there has to be a death. At Easter time, we talk about this a lot. In order for there to be a resurrection, there must be first a what? A crucifixion. And so the new energy, the expansiveness that wants to happen by means of you must have the spaciousness, must have the room inside, must have the death of the old in order to be born within you. And so the hero comes to that point. That point, it's almost like in the movies, you know, the falling on the knees, where the protagonist finally just stops trying to control things. And you once and for all realize that there's something greater out there. It's the prodigal son in the pig pen, at the lowest of the low, realizing that he has squandered everything. And the only way of redemption is to simply stop and allow himself to seek out the greater voice of that which is God and to reconnect. And so when we die, there is that phoenix rising. There is the bird coming out of the ashes. There is the renewal. Here's the thing I want you to realize, and in quantum physics and in all of those things, they talk about how chaos is actually a beautiful thing. Because chaos is necessary. in order for the regeneration of the new thing to come. So chaos is not something to fear or to run or to avoid. And a lot of times it is the fear of chaos that prevents us from going across the threshold into the hero's journey. But we live in a self-regulating universe. So if something is out of alignment, guess what has to happen? It has to get shaken up. Systems have to fall. Governments have to collapse. Weather patterns have to be instilled in order for the universe to self-regulate itself, and so that things that are not in alignment with the highest and best of civilization have to crumble and fall. They are not permanent. They are impermanent. And so because of that, if you and I can stand in the midst of that, realizing that all that's happening is self-regulation, is the genius, the perfection of creation itself is self-regulating. Haven't you ever seen a forest that has burnt down? And guess what happens in the ground? All of these beautiful little seedlings start to come up. That's an example of nature self-regulating itself. You and I have the same capacity for that. But a lot of times we live our lives in avoidance of whatever you want to label chaos. A lot of times we want to avoid anything that is unfamiliar, realizing that what we are denying is the next chapter or the next evolution of the greatness that wants to come and have its way by you and by me. And so when we are willing to do this, you see that you start to move into what is called transformation. The transformation of the old idea into the new idea. There is this thing called atonement. And if you were from a different religious background and you were asked to atone for your sins, what this really is, atonement, if you break the word down, is you are at one with the true nature of who you are. To atone for one's mistakes is to realize that you are not the mistake, that you are actually divine. And so the atonement that is happening here is a reawakening within consciousness and a realization of the truth of who and what you are. And then as this transformation and atonement takes place, we begin to return back into the world, a changed human being. How many of you have been there? You have gone through, you have been diagnosed with cancer. Cancer is a hero's journey. And then at first there is panic, and then there is fear, and then there is anger, and there is all of the emotion that goes with that. And you start to realize that you are at choice with that particular disease or diagnosis. And as you go on that, you feel like you've hit rock bottom. And as you begin to identify and work with who and what you are, there is transformation that comes out. And any of us who have been through any kind of challenge of that nature, if we have taken the hero's journey, we come out with a greater realization. You talk to any single person in the world who has had this challenge, whether it be disease, whether it be a business failing, whether it be a relationship collapsing, whatever it might be. And if they take the journey and become conscious in that journey, they will say, it's the best thing that ever happened to me. Because they realize that in that what has been uncovered or what layers have been peeled away have revealed a higher degree of authenticity and purity and beauty about who and what they are. And so we are called to take this hero's journey. It was the Buddha who said, only those who go where few have gone can see what few have seen. Only those who go where few have gone can see what few have seen. So without taking the journey, stopping at the threshold and saying no, then what we have done is we have limited ourselves and we have denied our soul. This weekend, of course, with the celebration of July the 4th, we talk about freedom and what freedom means. And when I looked into The Science of Mind by our founder, Ernest Holmes, I came across this where he said, if there had been a way by which the divine creative principle could have compelled man to suddenly appear on the scene of experience fully orbed with all of his freedom, if there had been a way to do that and still be an individual, then verily by the law would this have been done. What he just said was, if there had been a way where this is not even required of you, that the moment that your soul came into consciousness, you were fully complete in all of consciousness and all of reality, fully self-realized, then this would not be necessary. But you see, the whole thing is the fact that we get to discover that for ourselves. What would be the point if the work had been done for us? He goes on to say, so man must be created with the possibility of limitless freedom and let alone to discover that for himself. You've been given the freedom. You've been left alone in order to discover this journey for yourself, because it has no meaning if someone else takes the journey for you. And so here was the beautiful irony or the paradox of freedom. He says, and listen to this, the meaning of freedom implies the possibility of suffering. Meaning, because if we are free only by virtue of the possibility of choosing more than one course of action as an experience. In other words, the thing that makes you free is your ability to choose not to be free. That's the Cliff Notes version. Your freedom is predicated on the fact that you have the very right to deny your freedom. And so the freedom then is the ability to choose between freedom or suffering. And what we understand is that suffering is not ordained by the creative divine principle or that which we call God. But suffering is simply this. It is simply the ignorance of what freedom is. That's all. And so how do we deal or cope or come to rise above that ignorance? You go on the hero's journey. Now, this is the funny thing about this, is that we think sometimes by labeling it the hero's journey that it's something ridiculous, like, I don't know, traveling to Africa and climbing Kilimanjaro or something like that. But that's only one example of an outrageous hero's journey. But here's what I want you to get this morning. Every day is a hero's journey. So the moment that you wake up in the morning, you are ready to start. And the moment that you wake up, you come to the threshold of a decision, and you actually decide what that day is going to look like, what that day is going to be, how your attitude is going to shape and morph and create and draw the anticipatory energies and people and support systems based upon how you go on this journey. But if you wake up and in an unconscious mode, continue going about business as usual, without any change, without any interruption, without any spiritual practice, without any pause, without any meditation, without any silence, without any spiritual reading, without doing anything, then you have automatically stopped at the threshold point. And you have gone through a whole 24-hour capsule without changing or doing anything in regards to your true nature. One day. But in that day when you wake up and you decide and you embrace and you make time for your spiritual practice, then what you begin to embark upon is all of the help, the energies of help, either it be physical, whether it be, within the atmosphere, whether it be thought. You embark upon the mentor. You open the door to the phone call that brings you the relief that you have been praying for. You embark upon the connection by turning the corner and running smack dab into somebody who actually has the very thing that you've been praying and just saying that you wanted. And then you even run into the temptation, the self-doubt. We doubt ourselves every single day. You run into all of those things until you get to that revelation point where you realize that you're either going to continue to do the same old, or you're going to let that die and you're going to choose something different for yourself. And then you gravitate up into that transformation, into the realization of at-one-ment, until by the time it is nighttime and you put your head onto that pillow, you have realized that the person, you, this human part of you, has been living at the soul level throughout this entire day. Ernest Holmes said, if we did this, and he was referencing saying, if you committed to your conscious development every day, for 1 year, by the end of that year, you would not even recognize who you are. The change, the physiological change, the emotional change, the spiritual change, everything about you would be completely at a 180. And I often ask myself and to those around, what is it about us that hesitates when we know that that's exactly what the hero's journey brings to us? What is it that keeps us so often at the threshold? What is it that makes us so fearful about the unknown? Is it that voice of long ago that told us that we were crazy or not good enough, that we couldn't do it? And when, at what point do we allow ourselves to become deaf of that and to leave that and to move on? I was reading about hermit crabs this week because that's what I do. Guess where the word hermit came from? The hermit crab is called a hermit crab because it has no shell of its own. And what it does is it has to travel and it has to find some empty shell or faux shell in order for its physical body, as it takes in nutrients, to grow. And as it grows, it then outgrows the space of that shell. It abandons that shell, and then it goes off and it finds another shell. And then it grows and it fills the circumference of that shell. And when it's done that, it abandons that and it goes on. At no point, I haven't actually talked to a hermit crab, but I'm imagining that at no point the hermit crab goes, oh my God, I don't want to leave this. It's, I paid a lot for this shell. It's within the perimeter, It has a pool. It has pest control. I'm going to stay here. The hermit crab doesn't even think of those things when something larger is beckoning us. And so why then do you and I stay lodged in a shell that is far too tight that you and I have outgrown? And so I offer this template to you today. I ask you to take this home with you and to look at that and to realize this is my story. It always has been my story. Sometimes we want to attribute it to the big things, just the big things. But this is your day-to-day journey. This is what you and I have been called to do on a regular basis. And sometimes we are successful with it and sometimes we're not. And I do want to tell you this, that when we're not, the great thing is understanding that we don't stay in the land of the unconscious for very long. The things that used to upset us and frighten us and scare us and paralyze us, that sometimes might have even lasted decades. Maybe they only last a weekend now. But the good thing is we can look at this and we can say, that thing about freedom? Freedom is constant. And what the science of mind philosophy and New Thought and ancient wisdom teach me is that when I now embark upon and cross the threshold into the unknown, I used to do it with the bloody-knuckled grip. I used to do it with fear and trepidation and calling everybody on my cell phone saying, what's going on? And to do it with such resistance, almost as if the universe is having to drag me, kicking and screaming on the path of my transformation. But now, what it does is it allows me to look at the unknown and to go, you know what? Even though I can't imagine or picture the freedom, I've come to realize that the freedom is there. The freedom is already there. So I become less traumatized by life And I become more eager and more anticipatory of what the mystery is. Isn't it wonderful then? Then we can let go of control and we can allow ourselves to say, I have no idea what the solution looks like. But what I know is that the solution is there. That's the hero's journey. That's the conscious hero's journey. And that's the journey that I invite you to embark upon today. And so it is.